Welcome back to Boxing Squared. The prospect of a fight between Jarrell Big Baby Miller and Joe Joyce has been snuffed out by Miller's camp, with his co-promoter Dmitry Salita saying, "Yeah, thanks but no thanks. Come back in a year, we'll maybe see where you're at." And this whole thing has played out on social media in the past week or so, the will they, won't they fight, with Joe Joyce aggressively pursuing Jarrell Miller, who has also responded in kind. It hasn't been a one-way street. Miller has been actively engaging with Joe Joyce on this issue, and it's been a real profile boost for him as well. But Salita has ended speculation of a fight, snuffing it out in another exchange on social media. So we'll start with what happened. So Jarrell Miller, here's a clip of him being on Sway's Universe, and this is something that Joe Joyce's manager Sam Jones had responded to, saying, "It's a shame your man hasn't got the kind of heart and energy in a boxing ring at D. Salita," that's Dmitry Salita, Miller's co-promoter, "and you have zero belief in this big inflated lump. Let's get this settled in the ring at Big Baby Miller. Talk, time for action, sign the contract for the end of the year." And Dmitry Salita responded saying, "Sam, you were chasing a payday and creating hype for Joe by attaching his name to one of the biggest names in the heavyweight division. Focus your energy on getting some quality wins and exposure in the US. Let's see where you are in a year." And to that, Sam Jones responds, "Have you actually just said this? I'm hoping someone has stolen your phone and typed this response." And Salita responds, "Sam, don't worry about what I said or didn't say. Focus on your work and your business. We are doing A-OK." And Jones comes back again. "Joe has far superior amateur record and pro record than Miller, and you're crazy if you think otherwise. If you have any belief in your man, let's make the fight." And Joe Joyce, in relation to that earlier clip of Miller on Sway's Universe, had said, "Nice rapping, but you've got the heart of a squirrel, so sign the contract, you chicken." And just for some more context, so Dmitry Salita is currently in Las Vegas. He was interviewed by Boxing Social. He's retweeted a clip of that features him basically snuffing out the talk of a Joe Joyce fight, saying that Joyce needs to do much more. He's still got a couple more things he needs to do. He needs to build his profile, get a couple more good wins on his record. He hasn't done enough at this point to get a fight with Jarrell Miller, and he's just attaching his name to Miller and effectively getting some hype from it. So this is, in some regards, a very disappointing sort of end to what briefly looked like something that could happen. Because where it started was Jones was throwing out a few different names for potential opponents for Joe Joyce next. This is a week or 10 days ago. Miller's name was one of them, and Miller, he took the bait straight away and started engaging with Joe Joyce and Sam Jones online through social media. And he even, this is a clip here, a response clip from Miller where he said, "Send the contract."
"I'm not the one, bro. Believe me, I'm not the one. If you really was serious, my manager would be calling me with an offer right now. But you're full of shit."
So you have Miller doubting that Joyce really wants the fight. He says, send the contract. They are saying to Miller on social media, and we just heard just in some of these tweets from Joe Joyce and Jones, sign the contract. So obviously there's been some sort of offer or whatever been made. But Dmitry Salita has said, look, we're not interested. You haven't done enough. And he has said that it's all upside for Joe Joyce and it's all downside for Jarrell Miller. And when you look at their respective careers, you know, he does actually have a point to some extent, because Miller is far deeper into his pro career, more than double the fights. Joe Joyce has had about 10 fights. Miller is 23-0 and 1 draw on his record. And he was in a position to fight for a world title against Anthony Joshua, but we do know he messed it up. He had HGH, EPO, which those two would have had to been injected, and another substance called GW1516, of which Miller has never been able to account for. He's tried to sort of say the other two, the ones that had to be injected, was from a medical procedure. Whether you believe him or not, that is over to you. But his 6 months out of the WBA rankings, that's coming to an end soon, and they're potentially looking, and this is what Miller's other co-promoter Greg Cohen had said, a potential fight for October or November. And we've heard from Sam Jones via Frank Warren, who had contacted Miller's representatives, that Miller wants a warm-up. And if Dmitry Salita is not interested in the Joe Joyce fight now, well, that could be because they are eyeing up some sort of warm-up fight. But you also have to consider some of the other rumours that have been circulating that Jarrell Miller and his team are very close to some sort of deal with ESPN and Top Rank, a potential co-promotional agreement, which obviously would probably set another course for Miller, which would not include Joe Joyce. But I guess some of these claims from Dmitry Salita that you're chasing a payday and creating hype for Joe by attaching his name to one of the biggest names in the heavyweight division, some of that is certainly up for debate. Because obviously the chasing a payday bit, you could argue that Joyce is the one who was offering the payday, because that fight would no doubt be in the UK. It would probably be a BT pay-per-view event, if not a very high-profile BT fight night, in which, the money would be provided by Joe Joyce and their camp. They are the ones bringing Miller in as the opponent, not the other way around. But also creating hype for Joe Joyce by attaching his name to one of the biggest names in the heavyweight division. Couple of points there. I actually did a tweet about this after all this broke just a few hours ago before I recorded this video. Jarrell Miller has been engaging as much in this situation as Joyce and Sam Jones. So while there might be this whole back and forth, Jarrell Miller has absolutely been latched onto it and has been a big part of why this has actually grown some legs and has been sort of, the fans have been flamed of this potential fight. So he has been very much part of generating some hype, and his name has been attached to Joe Joyce's through some of his own actions. So it's not just a one-way street here. And when you think about it, all the bad publicity Miller has had in recent months, this is one of the first pieces of publicity recently that is actually not negative for Miller. It was the prospect of a fight against an up-and-coming, I don't want to say he's a prospect anymore because he just beat a contender in Bryant Jennings, but Joe Joyce is a fringe contender, and I said fringe, F-R-I-N-G-E, not French contender, fringe contender. He's not a fully blown contender at this point because he's still coming up. He still hasn't had enough on his resume to really put him in that conversation to the best contenders in the heavyweight division, although he's not far away. And if he took a fight with Jarrell Miller, that would have put him right there in the top 10, top 15. And this is why I guess, it's all downside for Miller, because if he takes a fight with Joyce, he loses that, doesn't necessarily get paid a whole lot. Bear in mind he was going to be getting several $1 million to fight Anthony Joshua. He'd be getting well less to face a Joe Joyce, but it still wouldn't be, a terrible payday, I'm sure, but it wouldn't be in the same ballpark. And you have to wonder what happens with Miller next. Where are they taking him? How do they overcome some of the perception issues that he is facing with at the moment? Because you have to ask yourself, who's going to take a chance on him? What is the next big fight that he's going to be in? And obviously we expect drug testing will be rigorous for whatever he's involved in his future fights. But the other thing there, one of the biggest names in the heavyweight division, that is, he kind of is, but he kind of isn't. When you think about it, Jarrell Miller, and this is one of the things we were saying ahead of the Anthony Joshua fight, in 2018 in particular, he was trying to talk his way into a title fight without really doing some of the hard work, because he had his record. He'd had guys like Duper, he'd also had Wok, he also had Gerald Washington. Wok and Duper certainly on the slide at the time that Miller fought them. So they were kind of decent wins, but also, they were against fading guys. Washington, he looked a bit of a husk after that loss to Deontay Wilder. Didn't put up a good effort against Jarrell Miller. Miller ground him into the dirt. Obviously, he was blown out by Adam Kovnatsky. This is Gerald Washington. But then he's come back and beaten Robert Helenius. So maybe that still is his best win. But this whole thing about building more wins and having a credible record to face Miller, well, it's not like Miller's record is one of the deepest in the division. Even though Miller, ahead of a potential fight with Joshua, said he'd done more than anyone in the heavyweight division to earn a title shot, I think there are a lot of people saying, well, really, have you? Especially when he was cherry-picking guys like Bogdan Dinu and also Thomas Adamek. And that is his recent form. Those are his last couple of fights, so it's not like he's been facing back-to-back threats in the heavyweight division. He was eking his way to a title shot, facing, guys that were severely overmatched, and he was thoroughly criticised for it. So Jarrell Miller doesn't exactly have the best record in the heavyweight division, but he's probably got one of the biggest mouths, and that's why he has built himself to be one of the more well-known heavyweights in the division. It's not because he's knocking everyone out in stunning fashion. If anything, some of his style is not exactly fan-friendly. Some of those better wins that he's had, they weren't exactly compelling performances in terms of a TV spectacle. So it is disappointing that a potential matchup with Joyce and Miller hasn't been made, because guaranteed, if he took that fight, he would be talking Joe Joyce up as a very tough, incredible contender, and that would actually be one of his better wins. It would be. And you'd be able to say it wasn't a guy on the slide. So some of the stuff is a little bit overblown for me by Dmitry Salita, and it's obvious they don't want to face Joe Joyce now. They've got other plans, and he's obviously decided, let's stick a pin in this. The speculation's starting to get a little bit out of hand, but also they're trying to turn it around and say Joyce is attaching his name to Miller's. Well, Miller has also been doing the same, and some of that is for PR purposes. He needed a little bit of good news, a bit of good PR in the public. And actually, if anything, this has shown that there still is a market for Jarrell Miller. As much as he was panned for what he did for his performance-enhancing drugs antics, you know, he is coming to the end of that 6 months, and if he does prove clean, he can re-enter the ring. And for as many people who want to see him, I guess there is also the other part. They want to see Jarrell Miller actually in a fight where he's in a competitive fight, and for someone to actually put it on him. But we'll have to see where this goes. But obviously, this is not something that's going to be happening now, if ever, by the look of it. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.